probably about 4 years or so ago, maybe even a little bit longer, but Philip, our third, had, I guess between Christmas and birthday and money that he had held on to for a little bit, it somehow wound up with more than $100 and somehow had gotten a $100 bill. I don't know exactly how that worked, but he had this $100 bill and he had it in a wallet in his bedroom. So we knew that, he knew that. So I don't know how long he had been sitting on that, but Peter, our number 5, I had to think about that. Anyway, so Peter, we have some neighbors whose yard backs up sideways to ours. And they've got 2 little boys, and their youngest, his name is Nolan, and that's probably Peter's best friend, and they play together all the time. And one particular day, they had been playing, and that night, I think it was Catherine that said something about this, about how Peter had given Nolan some money. Oh, we knew that Peter didn't have any money. And so we're like, well, where did you get your money? And so we keep pressing it, and finally, like he says that he found it. Well, he found it, as we keep pressing, in Philip's room, in Philip's wallet. So about that time, Philip heads downstairs as though his rear end is on fire to discover his $100 bill is missing. And so it turns out that Peter had given to Nolan $100. Some of y'all are going to start being a lot nicer to Peter now. I can you're like, no, Peter. Anyway, so we are pressing. So there's a couple of lessons here. One is like the whole stealing thing. Obviously, that's a big deal. But we're trying to ask, why did you give him $100? Now, at this point, Caroline has called Nolan's mom to say, hey, I think that Peter might have given Nolan some money. And it turns out, oh yes. So thankfully, the $100 bill we're able to get back. And so we're asking Peter about this. All right, so why did you take this that wasn't yours? But why did you give him a $100 bill? And so, like, his answer is, well, Nolan is my friend. So, you just give him money. And at like 5 years old, the difference between a $100 bill and a dollar bill, is there a difference? No. So this whole concept of money, well, to him it just didn't matter at all. $100, $1, nickel, whatever. It's just money, and at the end of the day, it just kind of doesn't matter. Well, those of you that are further down the road than 5 years old, you're aware that money does have more consequence. Money does matter. And certainly it is the case that we need it for everything in life has an associated price tag with it. So whether it's, $10 for a dozen eggs or whatever, or a gallon of gas or whatever it is that you're buying, there's a price tag on everything in life. And so we're aware that money does matter. But the reality is also this. Everyone that around the earth, we are all engaging in commerce. We are all engaging in the spending of some sort of commodity, some financial instrument, whether it's dollars here, yen there, or it's cans, or whatever it is. We're all doing this. It's not simply that we are spending money. It's not simply that we are using money, but more specifically for those of us that have a relationship with Christ. You're a follower of Jesus, and the symbols that we just reminded ourselves of a moment ago, you have responded by faith to that, and you're part of the team. You're part of God's family, and you're following God by faith. It is not merely that He does something on the inside of you where you're able to have this relationship with Him, though that is true. What He desires to do and what He does accomplish is that He affects us, the totality of us, from tip to tail, and it is the case that this should affect every aspect of our being, including how it is that we use even money. That how I, as a follower of Christ, I ought to be using money differently than someone who doesn't share that same decision, who hasn't made that profession, who hasn't experienced the difference that Christ makes in the life of a person. Put very succinctly, how I, as a follower of Christ, how it is that we use money ought to matter. But how can I make sure that I'm actually doing that? How can I, as a follower of Christ, I'm going to use money, I'm going to make money, I'm going to have money, I'm going to lose, all these things, but how can I use it that which is entrusted to my care, how can I use it in a way, not just as a person, not just as an American, not just as somebody that lives in this area, but specifically as a follower of Christ, how can I use it in a way where it actually matters? Peter, it didn't matter, but he was 5 years old. You're further down the road than that. How can you, as a follower of Christ, use it in a way that matters? Look with me to the answer that we see given to us in the 3rd chapter of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 5. We're just going to look initially at 2 verses. There we're told this by Solomon: honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first produce of your entire harvest. Then your barns will be completely filled and your vats will overflow with new wine. You're like, oh, no, Michael, you have just snuck in a tithing sermon is what you've done. Well, no, what's going on here is exponentially more than that. And in truth, it does help answer the question for us. How can I, as a follower of Christ, use that which he's entrusted to my care in a way that actually matters? And how I would answer that is to encourage you to do a couple of things. And the first thing is this: ask yourself what message the use of your money conveys. Ask yourself what message the use of the money that bears your name right now, what message is that conveying? Now, what we have just read here is just like every other passage of the Bible, and that is that every text has context. There's stuff that's being said around it that has meaning, that has bearing on what is actually being communicated. And likely many of you are aware of the context of Proverbs chapter 3, because for many, one of their favorite passages of Scripture, like if you're saying, hey, what's your favorite Bible verse? Many are going to go to Proverbs chapter 3, and what they'll start with is the immediate context of this, where in verse 5, Solomon says this: trust in the Lord with all of your heart. So when he's saying that, it's as if trust is a percentage, and trust is leaning. And so if you are leaning on God, the percentage of that, he says, should be with all of your heart. So take it to 100%. That your ultimate dependence should be on God, and the trust level ought to be not at 25, 30, 45%, but at 100%. So with all of your heart, Solomon says that we ought to trust in the Lord, and in doing so, this will help prevent something, and that is, it will help prevent us from relying on or leaning on our own understanding. Now, with respect to our own understanding, that involves a couple of things, and all of us have our own understanding. And so, in part, our understanding deals with the experiences that we have had in life, and all of those experiences have informed us. They have shaped us. They've had an impact on us. That's true. It is also the case that we are thinking people. Now, some don't think as much as they should, and we have some faulty ideas sometimes that we can come up with, but at the end of the day, we are rational people, and we are using reason, either appropriately or inappropriately, and that's all part of our understanding. He is saying to us, Solomon, this man of unparalleled wisdom, is saying to us that your dependence, 100%, ought to be on God, so put that fully, and that'll keep you from leaning on, depending on your experience and your rationality. Now, this doesn't mean that your experiences shouldn't have impact, that you all just ignore that, I'm going to operate and just try to forget everything. And it doesn't mean that you don't actually stop and think logically about stuff. Rather, the call is this, that you don't ultimately lean on just your experience and your reasoning skills. Well, why would you not want to do that? Let me ask you this. Have you ever been just certain of something? I know this is how it works. It could be about something consequential. It could be something about something inconsequential. Maybe in a movie, it's a whodunit, and you're like, oh, I've got this figured out. And then later you're like, oh, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. But that same type of thing happens in life all the time. And those of you that are further down the road, you can say, oh, you can specifically think of instances where you were just certain, this is what should be done, this is how this is working, this is the particular position, and this is the right answer to this problem in life, this challenge, this obstacle, this crossroads, whatever it is. You are certain of that, only to later say, yeah, I missed that one, didn't I? That's happened to all of us. And it is because of that reality we should, instead of ultimately leaning on our understanding, doesn't mean turn your brain off. It doesn't mean to ignore all the experiences of life, but it does say this, that more than what you lean and depend on you and your capacity to think through something, that you're saying, God, I'm going to trust you in ways that I don't even trust myself. If you do this, there are benefits. Verse 6 says, in all your ways, if you know him, you acknowledge him, he will, Solomon says, make your paths straight, which is to say that God will guide you. And so what seems like this, he will bring clarity to those decisions, clarity to that guidance. So he'll show you what it is that you should do. Then in verse 7, he encourages not to be wise in your own eyes. Whoa, look at me, look at me. Again, this is still in the context of depending on the Lord. Have an appropriate reverential fear for him, turning away from evil, and this is going to benefit you, he says, body and soul. That's the context of what we just read. So why in the world did I belabor those few verses so much? Because, again, that's the context of verse 9. That's the context of verse 10. He's talking about possessions. He's talking about the use of financial resources, but he does so in the context of trusting God. You say, well, I don't quite, what does that have to do with anything? Let me illustrate it this way. I've said before, in fact, I'm coming up on my 50th birthday, and so the 18th of this month, I will be 50. So go ahead and get something real nice. Real nice. Anyway, but for a few years now, I have been wearing what I describe as old people shoes. I've got some SAS shoes, and if you haven't ever tried them on, I don't just mean mine, they are the best shoes that have ever been made. They are awesome. Anyway, there's a particular pair. It's the best pair of shoes I've ever had in my life. They're not cool, but good night, they are comfortable. They feel so good. It's like I'm hugging my feet every time I put them on. But that pair of shoes I've had for about 2.5 years, and recently Caroline and I were going to go to lunch, and we wanted to go to Mythos over on Market Street. And it wasn't quite time, so we're like, well, let's kill some time. We'll go into the shoe market, which happens to sell those SAS shoes. And so I go in there, and I'm talking to a guy that I've dealt with before. His name is Mike, and he's looking at my shoes, and they do look very long in the tooth. They really do. They are kind of tired. And they're all kind of scratched up and scuffed up, and I've shined as much as I can. But they are very tired. And so, obviously, as a salesperson, he's wanting to sell me a pair of shoes. And he says something about those, and I said, yeah, they are so good, and I've had them for like 2.5 years. And he said, I think it's time to renew the subscription. And he asked me to take that shoe off, and he points to some stuff that's going on with it. And like I think it was maybe in my left, I was developing a hole in the left sole, which is a pretty good indicator that pair of shoes is worn out. Anyway. And one of the things that he does as well, though, is that he wants me to walk with him. And so he's watching me as I walk, which most ladies do. But in this case, this was... So he has me walk, and so he's watching my step. And he says, you're rolling a little bit. Your weight's going on the outside of your feet. And he's saying, hey, we ought to put you ought to get a new pair. We ought to put a pair of inserts in there. And I'm hearing this, and I'm like, I think he's just trying to sell me some inserts. And I'm already buying the old people shoes, so I mean, do I need inserts on top of them? And so then he pulls the sole of that shoe out. In fact, I took a picture of it. And so he pulls it out, and he says, I'm telling you, this is where your weight is going. He said, I can tell you by watching you walk, he says, but your soles don't lie. Your soles don't lie. They tell you where you're putting your weight. Well, you can tell where I put my weight, and it is rolling to the outside. Why? Because the soles don't lie. In life, you are leaning on stuff. You are leaning on people. You are leaning on your understanding. You are leaning on your rationality. You are leaning on your reasoning capacity. But God has called us as His followers that we ultimately lean on our ultimate leaning, where we're really putting our weight is on Him. And one of the clearest, and there are other ways that you can tell it, but one of the clearest ways that you can see where you're putting your weight on is in verse 9. Again, this has context. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. He's describing all of that. And then immediately he's talking about your possessions. He's talking about your financial resources that have been trusted into your care. And what he's communicating is this very simple thought. The use of your money that has your name on it just for a season of time, that which has been placed into your hands, how you use it communicates a message. It shows where your weight is being placed. That you are ultimately depending on you. You're ultimately depending on your properties. You're depending on your 401k. You are depending on whatever, or you're depending on, or you're putting your weight on God. Really? Really? It is communicating a message, and it's telling you, it's a very clear way to say, this is where my trust is. So, like in brass tack stuff, you say, well, how do I think through this? So, if I am supposed to be trusting in the Lord, let me think through some of the stuff that I have thought through with respect to financial decisions. You know, one of the things that I have concluded thus far is I can't afford, for example, to support the work of ministry as a part of this church. I just can't do it. I got too many bills. I got too many obligations. I got too many whatevers. That's communicating a message, isn't it? It's saying something about whether you trust God, whether you are depending on God, or whether you're depending on yourself. When you're making decisions about financial commitments, whether it is the purchase of a house, the purchase of a vehicle, the stacks, gobs of financial decisions. You can, whether you're renting an apartment or you're renting furniture, all kinds of financial decisions that you can make where you are obligating yourself, constraining yourself for periods of time, whether it is or not, you're leaning on you and your understanding. Well, based on my W-2, is saying that I make this, and I feel like I can swing this if I X well. I'm just telling you, you can look at your financial condition, and it's communicating a message. And it says something about whom you ultimately trust. If you want to use the money that is entrusted to your care in ways that actually matter, ask yourself, what message is the way that I use money? It's saying something. And it says something about where my trust lies. It shows me where I'm putting my weight. But there's something else based on this passage that we need to do, and that's this. Evaluate what you have established as financial priorities. Evaluate what you have established as financial priorities. You know, it's interesting, he says in verse 9, he says to honor the Lord with your possessions. And the word that's used there that's translated as honor literally means the actions which give or communicate allegiance and loyalty. And so the manner in which that God is factored into the equation of the financial decisions of your life says something. It communicates. Are you actually honoring Him? And then he says in verse 9, and with the first produce of your entire harvest. Well, obviously, this has historical context as well. And at this point in history, there's not a Federal Reserve. There's not a monetary system. There's not all the banking stuff that we have today. There would have been, precious metals. So there would have been gold and silver, and then perhaps various coins of particular sizes to communicate particular amounts. But so much of the financial transactions that would have occurred at this point in history would have been of things in kind. Tell you what, I need some onions. I'll give you a few of these apples for those onions. Or I need, we need some flour. And so how about I trade you this many bushels of wheat for that flour over there. So you can, and so engaging in that. So very agricultural, agrarian society. You understand that. Certainly, we're not like that today. And so if we're applying this in modern context, we're thinking about not produce. We're not even thinking about eggs. We're thinking about the dollars and cents that we have. So he says to honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first produce of your entire harvest. Again, in part of the context is this. These are words that come to us from Solomon. And there's a few things that we know about Solomon. Solomon loved the ladies. We do know that. Solomon was David's son. He was the third king of Israel. We know that. We know also that Solomon was given by God unparalleled wisdom. Wisdom to a degree that those before and since, nobody has had it to the extent that God gave this man wisdom. But as Israel's third king, this was a time, and probably the greatest economic time in the history of Israel, when in terms of their stature and their financial stature, it was at its peak. It was during this time the temple, in all of its elaborate, insane, over-the-top grandeur, was crafted with all of this gold, with all of these expensive building materials. And this is because God is blessing the nation financially. And as the king, Solomon is leading the nation during its time of greatest wealth. And so Solomon is going to directly benefit from that. Solomon has gobs and gobs and gobs of money, more financial possessions than you could possibly think of. He is just insanely wealthy. And every year that passes, more resources are coming into the treasury. His net worth is continuing to increase. And as that is going on, here's a guy that is saying something about money. I would argue that that is of consequence because this is somebody that knows a thing or two about money. This is not like the guy with no arms telling you which wristwatch is most comfortable. Right? This is somebody who has money, gobs of money, talking about the use of money. He knows, he's kind of like the commercial. I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. That's Solomon with respect to financial resources. And so he says, and with the first produce of your entire harvest. All right, so when he uses the word first, with respect to grammatical structure and the type of words, the word first is what we would call, maybe you remember this from English, it is an ordinal. So our ordinals are, for example, first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Those are ordinals. Not only are they conveying a sense of order, but they also convey the idea of priority. And so Solomon, a guy who knows something about money, not only does he have this insane wisdom, he has this insane volume of experience with profound amounts of material possession. And what God uses him to say is, using an ordinal conveying priority, he says to be thinking about God with the last cent? No. With the last dollar? No. With the first cent. That from the very beginning I am thinking about and I am involving God in the prospect and in the actual goings on and meaningfully involving Him in the manner in which that which has been entrusted to my care is actually spent. Well, what are the applications of this? Well, is there a tithing application? Sure, I think there's a tithing application. And in truth, we don't come into this world as givers. It's something that we have to be taught. We're instinctively greedy. We want more. We want to gobble up more. But consistently, what we have seen is that God leads His people to realize this. Everything that you have because God has blessed you with every bit. And what He asks is that you think about Him not with the last dollar, but at the first, at the very beginning, and that you give to support the advancement of other people coming to know and discover Him. We talked about it earlier. Everything has with it an associated price tag, and this is the plan designed by God to ensure that that happens. So yes, there's application on that front, but is that all this is? Is this just talking about tithing? Absolutely not. I believe that there is a broader principle at stake here, and it goes back to that notion that you're involving God and thinking about God not with the last dollar, but with the first cent. Not simply that he has a place at the table, but you're actively and asking God, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to use this? And honestly, think back over the past year. Think over the past 10 years. Most of us that or at least are adults now, you are making on any given basis a fairly frequent number of consequential financial decisions. I mean, obviously a home purchase is a big one, but you're also making decisions that have financial consequence that aren't merely purchases. They're, do I take this job? Do I move to this location? Do I refinance this loan? Do I pay this off? Do I put this in retirement? There's all of these decisions. And so the question is, where is God at the table? Does he even have a seat? And does he have the deciding vote? Too many times, again, if God gets a seat at the table, it's at the very last, and we may call on him, we may recognize him when we say, okay, God, I've screwed all this up. I have more month than I have money. I don't know what to do. So could you do something about this? And so, again, Solomon, this man that God has blessed with profound wisdom and profound wealth, says, involve God at the decision about how money is used, not at the end of the table, not at the end of the line, but from the very first cent that is made. And if you do this, what does he say? He describes that there are blessings that come from this. I'm not up here today as some televangelist saying, hey, sow your seed of faith and water it monthly. I'm just saying this, that as you honor God and involve him in the use of all that he's entrusted to your care, God blesses that. He just does. Does he bless it materially? Sure he can. Can he bless it relationally? Sure he can. Can he bless it in terms of kingdom influence? Absolutely. He's not limited in the ways that he can and will bless. I'm just saying that he blesses when we involve him. And I don't mean just meaningfully involved. We say, here, I'm giving you, you've got veto power. You're the one, at the beginning, I want to know what you want me to do with this. At the beginning, I want you to know, I want to have a sense of how you want me to operate with this. That is, if you want to use that which he's entrusted to your care meaningfully. Again, the word that's used here is first. First is an ordinal. It conveys, among other things, priorities. You know, every single one of us, whether stated or otherwise, we have financial priorities. We do. And you have like your order of operations, what you do first. All right, so we've got the mortgage payment, we've got the light payment. And so many times we've got these automatic drafts that are coming out, and you know, we got to pay this, we got to pay that, and we have stated or unstated financial priorities, but we never, too many times, if we're honest, before any of that ever happens, we say, okay, God, I have this because you've entrusted it to my care. What do you want? What do you want? What do you desire? I believe that God wants me. God wants you. He wants us as his people to use that which he has entrusted to our care in ways that actually matter. What does it mean to use it in a way that matters? A friend of mine, Alan, he's got 2 kids, and his oldest, this has been several years ago, I think it was around Christmas time, I don't know, he was kind of like Philip. He'd wound up with some money that he had gotten and accumulated, and his son loved the dollar store, or what used to be the dollar store, the $1.25 store, but that doesn't sound as good. So anyway, so James loved to go to the dollar store. And what he wanted was, he had more than $100, but what he had negotiated with his dad, he said, I want to go to the dollar store with my money, and I want to buy $100 worth of stuff. And $100 at the dollar store, you can buy a lot of stuff. You really can. There's the automotive section. There's housewares. There's candy. There's gobs of stuff at the Dollar Tree. And imagine as a kid, you just come up there with a shopping cart full, and you come out with bags full of stuff. And you go home and you're opening for hours all of this stuff. And, oh, it's so exciting. And that's all James could think of. And Alan said this, I just couldn't let him do it because I could not bear the thought of him using all of that money, spending all of it, and then afterwards, there's nothing ultimately left to show for it. Why? Because every bit of that stuff from the dollar store, how long does it last? About 13 and a half seconds. It breaks, it's eaten, it is so short term. And he's like, I just couldn't, as much as he would have enjoyed that, as much fun as that would have been, I just couldn't let him do it because there would have been nothing to show for it. What he was saying is that he wanted him to use it in a way that matters. Let me ask you this. Is God looking at you standing in line at the Dollar Tree? No, when I stand before the Lord, as you stand before the Lord, we are going to give account for the totality of our experience as a follower of His, and that includes the stuff, the money, the resources that He has entrusted to our care. Is He going to look at you and say, is He going to say to me, holy cow, Michael, did you think you were at the Dollar Tree? Why didn't you use it? Why weren't you using it in ways that matter? If God is doing an accounting now, what would He say to you? Will you bow your heads with me?